You are listening in there to our Fox 9 Minneapolis team. We are making sure to bring you their live coverage as they have a team of reporters here. It is now 1 o'clock on the East Coast and 10 o'clock on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and I'm here to bring you all of your top stories and the latest here on the school shooting over in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I do want to take you out to the latest information that we do have coming in right here. You can see a live look over the scene as 2 young children are dead and 17 other people wounded, shot as they prayed inside of a church. The Minneapolis police chief says the gunman fired through the church windows at Annunciation School, shooting at children and adults who were at mass worshiping. The shooter was armed with a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol, and investigators believe he used all 3 in the attack. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey calling this a, quote, deliberate act of violence against innocent children and worshipers. Officers say they arrived and entered the church, attempting to provide first aid to those who had been shot. The police chief saying 2 young children, ages 8 and 10, were killed while they sat in the pews. 17 other people injured in the attack. 14 of them are children, and 2 of them are in critical condition. Now, police have not released a lot of information here about the shooter, simply saying that he is a man in his 20s and he fatally shot himself in the back of the church. Still a lot left to figure out as you take a live look over that very active scene, a podium there, microphone in the middle, as we could get a news conference, a second one, in the coming hours. A lot to discuss here, and I do want to kind of break it down with an expert. So let's bring in Miguel Clarke, retired FBI supervisory special agent, joining us live here as more information comes in. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Good afternoon. It's terrible that we're having to do this under these circumstances.
A very sad situation there unfolding over in Minneapolis. And I did want to start by asking, based on your expertise, your perspective here, the first several hours of an investigation like this, what is it that law enforcement is really focusing on and trying to hone in on?
Well, the very first thing law enforcement needs to do is to ensure the safety of folks as much as they can. So that is secure the scene, ensure that there are no additional threats before they start a full-on investigation, going into the background of the attacker, trying to figure out what the motivation was, and see if we could understand what led them to decide that today was the day for targeted violence.
How do different agencies here, talking federal, local, we know that the FBI, ATF, but also Minneapolis police are involved. So how do they work together, especially when you have separate agencies, again, local and federal?
Actually, for things like this, we have a very professional law enforcement corps in the United States. So all the egos are going to be checked at the door, and it's going to be one collective investigative effort to try to get at the truth. And Crisis has a way of bringing together investigators in this way, and not just investigators, but the people who support the investigators, like the evidence technicians, victim witness coordinators, and all the other individuals who make it possible for a law enforcement agency to do the investigative work. Those folks are all going to be singularly focused on trying to get some clarity out of the situation and get answers to the questions the American people need the most.
And one thing we've heard, law enforcement held a very short briefing, about 10 minutes in length, providing the preliminary information that they can at this point. One thing they said about the shooter, they're not identifying him just yet, but saying he's a man in his 20s. But what stood out to a lot of people is no known criminal history. Now, of course, that could change in the future here. But I did want to ask you, is that maybe the usual type of makeup that you see, where somebody who commits an act this heinous has no criminal history?
I don't know that the criminal history is quite the indicator here. I mean, when we talk about the shooter, this is a person who is in crisis. And so I think it's more helpful to think about everything that leads up to that. So you're going to start off with some type of infraction, something they take very seriously. It's going to be a grievance. It'll be followed by some type of violent ideation. Hey, I've really been wronged. They stay in that. And then they start moving into planning and then probing the defenses and then taking those actions. So they don't snap. And I wouldn't look at what we're seeing, even though it's a violation of the law, I wouldn't look at it as thinking about past criminal history as being an indicator for it. These are people who are in crisis, and other things that they have tried have not solved the crisis for them.
I do want to talk about that news conference, as I mentioned, about 10 minutes in length. We heard from Mayor Jacob Fry there in Minneapolis, but also the Minneapolis police chief. How does law enforcement go about kind of balancing the public's request for information and maybe what they need to know versus what they do have to keep private, so to speak, for now as they work this investigation?
So the balance is, I think law enforcement is going to share all the information that would come out in trial anyway. So that's what you're thinking about. Of course, the public does have a right to know what's going on in the community. They have a right to figure out how effective law enforcement is being in keeping them safe. How effective are the rules and laws, or lawmakers or legislators? How effective is all of that? And when you're a public servant, you realize from the time you become a public servant that somebody's going to come and second guess the work that you do. And so you do all of that work looking for the opportunity for the public to see what it is that you've done. So I don't think there's going to be difficulty for them balancing, what to share and what to keep private for in the short term.
What kind of challenges might investigators face during an investigation like this? Again, as we mentioned, the gunman, according to police, took his own life there at the scene of the shooting. I'm sure that plays a role as well, because you're never going to have the chance to actually speak with and interview the shooter.
That's true. I think for most of these, when you start to talk to the families, which is absolutely it's going to be next, you're going to talk to the families, talk to friends, try to get an indication as to what things were going on in his life, what were the stressors. There's a key point in here. You're going to find that there's something that he just couldn't get over, something he was very upset about, and he had violent ideation around that. And he leaked that information to the people closest to him, but it was never provided in the context of, hey, this is a significant problem. So you think about a parent seeing a child, and that child has maybe a past suicide attempt. They're not thinking about that as being that their child is being on the pathway to targeted violence, but they should, right? I mean, if you start to think about people, I think it's K through 12, when the shooters are in that age group, 100% of them have thought about suicide prior to the event. And when you're thinking about, outside of that age group and older but basically older, then you're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30% have contemplated suicide prior to the event, and about 39 to 40% contemplating suicide during the event. So suicide and thoughts of suicidal thoughts are a significant part of this. And again, we know that because we believe the shooter to have taken his own life.
As we discuss all of this further, I mean, you kind of already hinted at this a little bit when you talked about family members, but what is it that the public can do right now as this investigation really begins when it comes to getting information to police? Maybe they had an interaction with this guy, they're a family member, a friend, a neighbor. What can the public do?
I think starting to look at grievances differently. We've got to get to a point where people can express their grievances. We're actually listening to them and we're helping them get over those grievances. So if you think about a pathway to targeted violence with 5 or 6 steps, at every one of those steps, there's an opportunity to get them off of that pathway. And law enforcement isn't going to get involved until the attack starts. So the onus is on the rest of us really to start listening a little bit more and to recognize some of those signs. The same way that if we have like a suicide hotline or something along those lines, if you have folks that have some suicidal ideation or about that, we can't assume that once that part of the crisis has passed, that the crisis is over for them. So that's really a difficult part. Most of the family members and friends are seeing things that are significant issues, but they're not recognizing those as things that they should share with law enforcement. And then the other part of it is that, today, I think law enforcement does have some brand damage from some very limited incidents that have happened in the past. And so the last thing that people are thinking about is sharing information with law enforcement because they don't want to get somebody in trouble. And they're afraid that there may be some type of overreaction from law enforcement. Because at the end of the day, law enforcement doesn't have a lot of tools to use when you're talking about some type of an emotional crisis, a mental crisis of some sort. We just don't have those tools that we can use to help people.
Any question or questions that you have that you wonder if investigators will answer at some point today or in the coming days?
Um, Basically, they're going to do a deep dive on this individual. Lots of folks are going to be interviewed, and we'll have a very good understanding of who he is, who he was, and people are going to start to come out of the woodwork and talk about the ideation. We're also going to see, efforts to probe the defenses at the church where that target was. He probably would have done some research and reconnaissance, and we're going to see some of that as well. So it won't be a 100% clear picture, but we'll have a very good idea as to who he was and what was really going on with him that preceded the attack.
Miguel Clarke, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and breaking it all down. Obviously, a very tragic situation, a lot of information still left to figure out here. Is there anything else that you want to add at all before I let you go?
Um, I think when we start looking at the problem that we have here, resilient people don't commit crimes like this. They just don't. So we really need to start thinking about what it takes for our own personal resilience. How do we come back from the things that infractions? How do we come back from hurts? How do we kind of soothe ourselves and get ourselves to the point where we can take ourselves off of that violent path? I think everyone gets on the path. Everybody who's experienced an infraction has gotten angry, gotten upset. They're on that pathway. And then they decide to get off the pathway because they are more resilient people. And so I think that's really going to be the key moving forward, is to really focus on that resilience, giving people the tools to deal with the things that go wrong, and helping them just accept the fact that some days are going to be hard and not every day gets to be easy.
All right, Miguel Clarke there, retired FBI supervisory special agent. Thank you so much for joining us here and providing your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And I do want to take you out to the latest information with a live look